Hi, in this video we'll be looking at price elasticity of demand again, but in this one we will be focusing on what we mean by elastic demand. So to kick this off, for simplicity, when we're thinking about whether something is elastic or inelastic, we only really care about the absolute value of our price elasticity of demand, which means that we ignore the minus sign in front of it. We said in the previous video that we will usually have a PED that is negative because an increase in price tends to cause a decrease in the quantity demanded, but we can also have positive price elasticities of demand. However, when it comes to elastic or inelastic price elasticities of demand, we do not care about the minus sign in front of it. So, say a PED of -2 and a PED of +2, these are still going to both be elastic demand, even though one is negative and one is positive. And why are these elastic? Well, because we define elastic demand as a price elasticity of greater than 1. And so -2 isn't greater than 1, but we're only talking about the absolute value. So the absolute value of -2 is still going to be +2, which is greater than 1. So let's look in a bit more detail at this elastic demand. And so what we mean when we say elastic demand is we're saying that with price elastic demand, a percentage change in price will cause a larger percentage change in quantity demanded. So if we think about this for a second, let's consider that we increase our price by 10%. Well, if we have elastic demand, this means that in response to that, our quantity demanded is going to change by some amount, by something that is greater than 10%. So we might see that our quantity demanded decreases by 20%, or that it increases by, say, 30%. If we have some strange good that increases, it's where we increase our demand for it a lot when we have an increase in price. What's more likely is that an increase in price by 10% is going to cause a reduction in quantity demanded by, say, 20%. The key to note is that just the change in quantity demanded is going to be greater than the change in price. Our change in quantity demanded greater than our change in price. Remember that these are all in percentages though. So that's our key with elastic demand. And again, the higher the price elasticity of demand, the more elastic the demand for the good. So, say for this 20% reduction example, this means we have a PED of -2. But for this 30% one, we're going to have a PED of 3. So this has a larger PED of 3, so there is a larger change in quantity demanded. So, and the definition we have here is that the higher the PED, the more elastic it is. So one other thing to note here is that an elastic demand gives us a flat demand curve. The elasticity of demand, or the price elasticity of demand, is going to govern the slope of our demand curve. And the impact that having elastic demand is that it gives us a flatter demand curve. So we've drawn up an example of an elastic demand curve. And as we can see, this demand curve is, well, it's flatter than what we usually draw a demand curve as. A pretty standard demand curve we might think of as having a slope something like this, but we've got a demand curve that is elastic, so it's flatter than this. The slope is shallower. So why do we draw an elastic demand curve like this? Well, let's imagine that we were starting at this P0, and if we use our demand curve, we'll see that the price P0 gives us a quantity Q0, and that's where we begin on our demand curve. Let's consider that we decrease the price slightly. So we're decreasing the price to P1, so by just this small amount. Well, if we do this, we see that this price P1 will increase our quantity demanded all the way up to Q1, to this new point on the demand curve. And it should be pretty clear to notice that we have just changed our price by this small amount, this distance between P0 and P1, but this has increased our quantity demanded by a much larger amount, this distance between Q0 and Q1. So a small change in price has given us a large change in quantity demanded. And again, remember, we're referring to these in percentage terms. And this is why we have a flat demand curve, because it gives us this effect where a small change in price will cause a large change in quantity demanded. Now, the final thing to look at is this special case where we have what we call perfectly elastic demand. And as we said, as we increase our price elasticity of demand, we get more elastic. And so if we keep increasing this and increasing it, the highest price elasticity of demand we can possibly have is an infinite price elasticity of demand. As we've said here, that's the highest we can possibly get it to. And as we've also said, a flatter demand curve is a more elastic demand curve. So as we get the highest possible PED possible, an infinite PED, this is going to give us the flattest demand curve possible, which is of course a perfectly horizontal demand curve, as we have on this graph here. So how do we interpret this? Well, consider that we start at this price P. Imagine that we increase our price even slightly. So we go up to this slight increase in P1. Well, where is our demand? Well, it's our quantity demanded. We don't have any graph to get to because this is a perfectly horizontal demand curve. It will go on horizontally forever. That's not very well drawn, but you get the point. And our demand is actually then, if we increase our price, going to be on the y-axis, the vertical axis. So our quantity demanded is going to be 0, even with a tiny increase in price. Whereas at our original price, P, we could have any amount demanded. So whatever is available in our economy, if we were to draw a supply curve on here, that's what our demand would be. And just the tiniest of increases in price sends this demand right down to 0. So it's perfectly elastic. Even the tiniest change in price causes a huge change in quantity demanded because we have perfectly elastic, or we have infinitely high price elasticity of demand. So that is elastic price elasticity of demand. I hope that made some sense. If it did, please leave a like. Make sure to check out the playlist for other videos like this. Next up, we'll be looking at inelastic demand, so check out the playlist which is there, and subscribe to add some econ to your subscription feed.